Baseball Tonight, the podcast.
This is the Baseball Tonight podcast for Friday, March 10th, 2017. I'm Buster Olney, and our esteemed producer is Josh Macri. Well, today we'll be talking with Jerry Dipoto, the general manager of the Seattle Mariners, about the new and improved King Felix. Doug Glanville will tell you what he thinks about the new rule changes and about Tim Tebow. And the Fireball Express will give their perspectives on some X factors, division by division, and some terrible news for one team in the American League West. And we'll start our news and notes in the American League West. Sonny Gray, who is the ace of the Oakland Athletics, is going to start the season on the disabled list because of a lat muscle strain. The Athletics say they don't really know when he's going to return to the mound. Andrew Kashner, $10 million signing in the offseason for the Texas Rangers, someone they had thought was going to be the number 4 starter, has been shut down for the second time this spring because of soreness in his right upper biceps. Also, Tyson Ross, who is someone they counted on, is not going to be ready to start the season. Michael Brantley will play a 5-inning simulated game today. We talked to Paul Hoynes of the Cleveland Plain Dealer on Thursday's podcast about how Brantley seems to be progressing from those recurring shoulder problems. Dusty Baker told reporters that Max Scherzer will throw his next bullpen session on Sunday as he works to come back from that finger problem. Another rough day for Anibal Sanchez of the Detroit Tigers. He allowed 4 runs on 6 hits in 3 innings. He, of course, is owed $21 million for 2017 and a $5 million buyout on an option for 2018. We talked about how Kevin Gausman of the Orioles could be a big breakout candidate this year in the American League. Well, here's one from the National League. The Rockies' John Gray. He faced a minimum 9 batters against Team Puerto Rico on Thursday, struck out 2 in 3 innings. Here's what happened once someone reached base.
Former number 1 pick in the draft, throw to first, and they got him. John Gray picks off Angel Pagan for the second out.
Yeah, so John Gray picked off one of the 2 runners that got on against him, that call courtesy of KDSP. Gray talked about his outing afterward.
There's not a ton of mistakes you can make going in facing a lineup like that, but just focus on pitch each time and just execute each pitch and move on to the next one. And I'll find more stuff out about myself with these games. I found out that the curveball is going to be a weapon. I've used it twice now to strike people out. So I think I'm making good strides into developing a full arsenal.
We've been talking this spring about the monster that is Yoenis Cespedes after a winter of weight training, and on Thursday he did this.
Cespedes rips this ball. That ball is gone. Two home runs in the inning for the Mets. Cespedes has his 3rd this spring.
And it was a laser shot, Josh. I don't know if you noticed, but it took him about 60 minutes to get around the bases. Now, in defense of Cespedes in that regard, he has been dealing with a quad problem, so he's taking it easy in spring, and after a winter of hard work, maybe he deserves it.
Yeah, I noticed the length of the trot there. I also noticed that it is impossible for him to button the top 3 buttons on his jersey because his chest is so big. So, a couple of observations there coming out of Mets spring training that don't have to do with Tim Tebow.
Yeah, if he does some more bear squats, then maybe he will be down to 4 buttons he won't be able to button.
Exactly.
By the way, he told the New York Post in a story done by Dan Martin, Joel Sherman this morning that he wants to be the National League MVP. He's eyeing the MVP trophy. The quote was, "That's what I want," he told the Post through a translator. "The first thing is to stay healthy, but these things that I've always thought about, it's any ball player's dream." The Cubs signed Chris Bryant to a $1.05 million contract, which is a record for a second-year player. And it's official. Major League Baseball announced that the Cardinals and Pirates will play a regular season game at the Little League World Series on Sunday, August 20th. Josh, you knew about this back in January, but of course, I'm paid by the entity that's involved in this part of the Sunday night broadcast. I'm pretty excited about being in Williamsport. The question is, can I claim credit for a scoop when it involves a company that pays me? What do you think?
Can, Buster. Absolutely. No question about it. Get those scoops. You earned it.
Scoop! Great. Something I got from my employer.
There you go.
Let's get to it.
It's the Fireball. Express with Karl Ravech and Justin Havens on Baseball Tonight.
And Karl Ravech is the host of Baseball Tonight. Justin Havens is a producer for Baseball Tonight, and some big doings in the American League West, guys. Yesterday, some big injuries popping up. First, let's start with Sonny Gray, who's the ace of the Oakland Athletics. No one thinks that Oakland's going to contend this year, but Sonny Gray, extremely important to that franchise because he's someone who has been viewed as a guy who could be flipped for a lot of prospects. He's someone who, coming into the spring, 3 years, 61 days of service time, he's still relatively affordable. That's part of his value. And on Thursday, we learned that he has a lat strain. He's out for at least 3 weeks. He really is out indefinitely. For Oakland, a devastating injury because, let's face it, if he's going to have any trade value leading up to the July 31st deadline, he's got to pitch. And it doesn't look like he's going to pitch anytime soon. Who knows when they're going to be in a position to get something in return, especially because he wasn't very good last year, Karl.
Yeah, 27 years old. And this one really strikes close to home as I'll be flying from St. Louis to Oakland for the opener. And we were looking forward to seeing Sonny Gray pitch in the opener. And with all due respect, now we're probably looking at Kendall Graveman. It speaks a lot about the A's, but it certainly speaks about the idea that he was hurt last year. And you know how this business works. You begin to develop a reputation as somebody who can't stay on the field. For somebody who's only 27 years old, he's beginning to certainly develop that reputation. And I think the idea that he went in thinking this isn't going to be such a big deal and then found out that he had a lat injury that's going to keep him out for 3 weeks and maybe more, that's really unsettling. And it really does eliminate the possibility of any potential trade talk. And eventually there are going to be teams. I mean, his name comes up every single season. So there are going to be teams that are always going to call Oakland and say, what about Sonny Gray? Well, we just went through the whole NFL opening day of all that trade, free agency stuff, and you do realize that there are times where players get labeled, and we're not going to move him because he's hurt, or we're not going to take him because he's hurt too often. Sonny Gray, at only 27, is now in that category, and it's a big blow to Oakland. I mean, I really have empathy and sympathy for the fans of the Oakland A's. I forget the organization, but you're going into a season knowing that you're not going to be good at all. And I know it's not a new refrain, but it just stinks. It's awful. I mean, they know, and now they've lost their ace. Bob Melvin it is a disaster in Oakland already, and the season hasn't started.
Yeah, Justin, during last season, I had so many executives around baseball asking the question, hey, what do you hear about Sonny Gray? Why do you think he's struggling? And look, last year it might have just been a case of poor performance, and he was set up to bounce back. But apt to Karl's point, now it's going to all be about, for him, reestablishing himself to the point that people aren't going to think of him as being a guy who's an injury waiting to happen.
Well, it's all about the bad taste in your mouth, right? Like, on the short list of people who wanted the 2017 season to start and to put the 2016 taste out of their mouths, Sonny Gray would be right at the top of that list. He had 491 career innings entering last year with a 2.88 ERA, and then basically saw that double. I think everything Karl said is true. I think this is depressing from an Oakland A's standpoint. It's depressing for anybody who wanted to enjoy watching Sonny Gray pitch on opening day. But to me, there's also, obviously no one or few people pay attention to the Athletics in terms of contender or national scale, but I was actually looking forward to them as kind of one of the potential under-the-radar dynamic pitching staffs, particularly young pitching staffs. Beyond Gray and Graveman, who Karl already mentioned, you got Manea, you've got Cotton, you got Jesse Hahn, you got a couple of really interesting arms that could have made for, if not a contender season, then at least a season that was interesting to track and maybe watch these guys develop. But with Sonny Gray going down, I mean, it really is just an awful way to start the season. And it reminds you that while it seems like the window to trade these young assets will remain open for an indefinite period of time, it just takes one derailment to completely torpedo the guy's value. And I think that's where we're at with Sonny Gray now.
For anybody that thinks that baseball has some type of parity when it comes to payrolls and things like that and ability to withstand one of these injuries, the last time the Fireball Express was on the launching pad, we were talking about David Price. So when you talk about David Price, you then say, well, they can manage this because of Chris Sale and Rick Porcello and Eduardo Rodriguez and whoever else they have. And you look at Oakland and you're like, done, dead, no chance. I mean, there was such a significant gap between teams still in Major League Baseball. This is a striking reminder of that.
Yeah, the progress of Sonny Gray, without a doubt, the most important thing for Oakland this year, one way or the other, whether they kept him or not. They needed him to get better, and he's not going to get better anytime soon. Guys, I think if you looked at the 2016 standings and who finished first, I think the most vulnerable division winner from last year probably we would all agree would have been the Texas Rangers anyway going into spring training, because the upgrades that we've seen from the Houston Astros, from the Seattle Mariners, and the Angels, to me, are underrated because they're a really good defensive team, and now there's this. Andrew Kashner has been shut down for the second time this spring. They, of course, don't know when Tyson Ross is going to be back. I can tell you this. When the Rangers signed Andrew Kashner to that one-year, $10 million deal, I had people with other teams screaming, saying, what are they thinking? Because he had broke down repeatedly last year. There actually was a trade killed involving the Padres because Kashner didn't pass the physical. They were surprised that the Rangers invested in such a high-risk pitcher as Kashner. And now when you look at Texas, you got Cole Hamels, and you've got Yu Darvish, and you got Martin Perez, and then you have no idea. And the Rangers acknowledged yesterday that they're open to all options, whether it's re-signing a Colby Lewis, looking at someone like Doug Fister. Justin, it is a potential disaster for the Rangers, what's going on with their rotation.
Yeah, I agree. So 2 points to make here. I don't know why. I agree. I don't know why anybody would have ever expected anything out of Andrew Kashner, and I get that's why he only got a one-year deal. But we're talking about a guy who, since the start of the 2015 season, has a 4.72 ERA. Putting aside the fact that he's usually not available, I mean, that's not even quality pitching when he is out there. And he's never hit 200 innings pitched in a season. And that brings me to my second point. And I'm going to go full hindsight on you here, because I did not mention this before Andrew Kashner went down. But if I was looking at the Rangers rotation, fronted by Hamels and Darvish, two legitimate frontline guys, and looked at the rest of the rotation, what I would not have done is invest in high-risk options that are very likely to not be available for you. What I think would have been the more prudent path would be to go and get guys that you can, to the extent that you ever can with pitchers, count on them for throwing 175, 200 innings eater type of guys. I don't know that these are the exact right answers, but the Braves went out and got R.A. Dickey and Bartolo Colon to functionally eat up innings to take pressure off of their young arms. Well, the Rangers don't need pressure off of their young arms. They need guys who are actually going to fill innings, and I don't get why signing Andrew Kashner and other injury risk guys puts this team in the best position. You've got the guys that are already starting in the postseason if you get there. That's Darvish and Hamels. What you need to do is get to the postseason, and I don't think these moves further that cause, with or without Kashner's injury.
Karl?
I think if the Angels are better, I think it means a lot more to the Rangers. I fell in love with the Rangers team last year. I think the Napoli thing helps them. They remind me a little bit of the Red Sox. Clearly, the Red Sox have better pitching depth, but I really like their position players. I like the offense that they're going to be able to score with, and I love those two guys. I mean, I really wish that Darvish were healthier last year for that team, because I really thought they had a chance to win a World Series. So I think if they can survive with those two guys and some form of 3, 4, 5, and their competition used to be for 5, and obviously now it's really for 4, 5, and maybe Colby Lewis looks around and says, "Okay, I'll go try it again." But I'm less. I mean, to me, Andrew Kashner was never really going to be a solution. He's just further along the hasn't really met expectations in his career. Because I remember a couple of years ago, we were there opening day, man, that dude, he looked great when he threw the ball. He got great results on occasion, never consistently enough. But there was a time where I was, like most people, really believing in what Andrew Cashner had the potential to be. And it just was like a car engine that when it started, and it was rare that it started, it ran beautifully. But boy, you just kept hoping, like, are we going to kick in? Are we going to kick in? And finally, you just stopped expecting it to work. And I think that, anybody that looked at Andrew Cashner and said that this is now the answer to the number 3 problems for the Texas Rangers, it never felt that way to me. So I don't look at a setback for Andrew Cashner as some earth-shattering, wow, what are they going to do now? I think it may speak a little bit to the preparation of John Daniels, who's amongst the best, to not have necessarily an alternative plan for something like this to happen. I mean, those guys are really smart in that front office to sit there and think, we got our guy here in Andrew Cashner. I'm not as worried about it. If it were Darvish or Hamels, it'd be a whole different story for me.
Yeah, and we saw the Mets last year get a little bit lucky as they wound up making the playoffs because they got unexpected performances out of Seth Lugo and Gesellman. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's got to happen with the Rangers. They have to get lucky. They have to get unexpected solutions, which is certainly possible, but it's not ideal when you're talking about being here in the situation in early March. Guys, I wrote a piece that was posted on ESPN.com on Thursday. It was about the question of whether or not the David Price injury might be an affirmation for some baseball analysts about giving pitchers huge contracts. And in that piece, I ran through all the major contracts that were signed from 2015, 2016, whether it was Zach Greinke or Price or Jordan Zimmerman, etc., and asked the question, if a team could do it again, would they? And I asked the question in relation to the upcoming free agent class of Jake Arrieta and Yu Darvish, and perhaps Johnny Cueto and Masahiro Tanaka can both opt out of their deals. Generally speaking, Karl, if you were running a team, how do you feel about giving a pitcher, and I'm not talking about, an $80 million deal for someone like Arrieta. Obviously, that would be a bargain. $100 million would be a bargain. But would you give him $200 million, which has been speculated upon? Would you give Yu Darvish, who had Tommy John surgery, $175 to $200 million?
No. The players are in such a unique position here because if you're asking an individual owner all the time, if they would commit $200 million to somebody like Tanaka or Arrieta, or anybody for that matter, the individual owner, I would think, is always going to say, of course not. But this isn't just about me, Buster, as the only sole owner of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, where I don't have to worry about competition in the 1990s or 80s because I'm the only show in town. So if you want to come perform for me, you will take what I want to give you, assuming you think it's fair. In the case of a baseball owner, you're dealing with 29 other owners, and all it takes is one. And oftentimes, I've seen it with Scott Boras a billion times, wow, the GM is smart enough not to give my guy, but I'm going to go talk to the owner of the Tigers. I'm going to go talk to the owner of the Washington Nationals, and if I can get him to nibble on this, well, it doesn't matter what me, Karl Ravech, the owner, thinks about giving Jake Arrieta $200 million, because someone else is going to, and then it's up to me to decide, is that a prudent business move, because my team is right on the verge of winning a World Series, and I know, what the value of that is for the 1 year, and then the halo effect maybe for the year after. As long as we stay competitive, we can kind of keep these fans around. So I think if you ask an individual owner, they'll always say no. My answer to the bigger question about long-term commitments and big dollars for pitchers is there is now tangible evidence that there's a certain age at which you don't invest long-term. But I would always go to my ultimate decision maker, which is my bank account and my income versus my outflow. And anytime a team is willing to give a pitcher $25, $30 million a year, to me it always signals they can afford it. I'm not saying it's a prudent decision, but I would always opt to call Jake Arrieta and say, dude, you're looking at $200 million for, I don't know, let's say 6 years. Let's just say 5 for the sake of the audience and me. It's just easy to do the math. So 5 years, $200 million. You understand what that is? That's about $40 million a year. Well, Jake, you want $40 million a year. You're not going to get it anywhere else, but I'm going to do it for 2 years or 3 years. I'll give you 120 for 3. I cannot give you 5 years. And if you don't want that average annual value to be that high and take 120 million, then I'm out. So I don't mind the dollars spent. It's the year commitment. I cannot and would not do that. But again, that's the single question to an owner, not to the 29 others, because you're really asking it to all 30 of us, not just me.
Yeah, and I've had agents and baseball executives tell me the one factor we should never forget in this situation now is, yes, those are big contracts. Yes, a lot of times they don't work out. But right now, after a very favorable CBA for management, there is a lot of money available. And you look at a guy, you mentioned Arrieta, in the fall of 2017, maybe he's a perfect solution for a team like the Houston Astros, who don't have an onerous payroll, but maybe they need one more pitcher to go over the edge. Justin, what do you think?
There have been much more complicated studies done on this, but for simplicity's sake, I took a look at the number of 4-win seasons produced by starting pitchers over the last 10 seasons, 2017 or 2007 to 16, and the ages are pretty telling. There have been 15 such seasons by a pitcher age 30, 18 age 31, 11 age 32. Then there's a significant drop, just 6 and 7 for ages 33 and 34, and then it goes off a cliff. There is one such season for an age 35 pitcher and 2 each for 36 and 37. So you can see where the decline starts. It's, as you mentioned in the column, the risk starts right around the risk is always inherent with pitchers, but it starts at age 30 and it only goes up from there. And I'm with Ravi. I understand the market dynamics and that it only takes one, but I'm still to this day shocked and surprised at the Nationals game, Steven Strasburg, what they did when he'd shown absolutely no ability to stay consistently healthy. I think these are almost universally a disaster.
Yeah, and Darvish will be 32 years old next fall. He'll be a fascinating test case. He's represented by Scott Boras, who always seems to find that one owner, and we'll see if that happens again. Guys, we got about 5-6 minutes left. I want to go quick on division race X factors. So what we're going to do is go division by division. You tell me what you think the biggest X factor is in each of these divisions. I'll chime in too. Karl, I'll let you start with the American League East. What's the biggest X factor?
The biggest X factor to me is the ability of the Red Sox to deal with the David Ortiz absence. I think that, again, I think I said it last week, I think we've overstated, his value literally with his numbers and understated his value to that team. I have legitimate sort of questions about how somebody like a Hanley Ramirez responds without having that dude around. And I think that dude, and we all saw it every time we were in that clubhouse, what he meant. And when there was a bit of a blip, he would be the guy because of his ability on the field, but what he also did off the field to raise them. I think they have the best team in the American League. I think they have the best team in that division. But I think a lot of us, me included, continue to kind of think of them as the team that has David Ortiz. And the first time you see them without him for an extended period of time and they get into a batting slump offensively, that's going to be the question that comes up. And the way that these players are pitched without having Ortiz in that lineup, I think could bring other teams in that division, including the Orioles and the Yankees, certainly teams that can compete along with Toronto. I think they're the best team. If that question isn't answered favorably, there's 4 teams that can win the division.
I'll take the American League Central. I think the X factor, the patience of the Royals and the Tigers, they want to win this year, but let's face it, both of those teams are also in great need of a rebuild, a turnover. And so the question is, if those teams are, within 5-6 games of first place in July, will that be close enough for their front office to say, yeah, we'll continue to try to go for it? Or will they be some of the early teams to wave the white flags, and that gives the Royals a chance to market an Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakas, the Tigers to push some of their guys? Justin, How about the National League West?
NL West, I'm going to go with John Gray, going very specific here. We've talked about the Rockies as a potential kind of sleeper, dangerous team. To me, if John Gray takes the proverbial next step and establishes himself as a legitimate frontline starter for that rotation, then the game kind of changes in Colorado. He is only his ERA was not that impressive last year. However, with a 4.61, but his FIP was 3.60, thanks to really impressive strikeout and walk numbers. And in fact, he's only the second Rockies pitcher aged 24 or younger to ever post a FIP under 4, which isn't even that impressive of a mark. Ubaldo in 2008 was the other one. I think his peripheral stats indicate a big step forward this year. And while he slowed down last year, I think the overall picture is still very promising.
Dominant performance against Team Puerto Rico for John Gray on Thursday. Karl, what about the National League East X Factor?
Yeah, the X factor for me, Justin mentioned Strasburg. He's sort of a Y factor. To me, the X factor is Yoenis Cespedes. I think, God forbid, Yoenis Cespedes take one off the wrist in Game 3 of the season and be out for 2 months. The Mets pitching is really good, but that offense is still kind of a dysfunctional offense. They brought Cespedes back, and then what else? And if he goes down, that team is in a whole bunch of trouble. So I think Yoenis Cespedes' health is the X factor to that division. DeGrom looked really good yesterday. I know Harvey's pitching today. Even Zach Wheeler is going to get on the mound today. So there's a lot of reason for optimism. But boy, to me, that offense hinges on one guy, and that's a real dangerous place to be.
X factor in the American League West, Dallas Keuchel, Cy Young Award winner in 2015, 20 wins, a 2.48 ERA. Last year, his ERA rose by more than 2 runs. And if Dallas Keuchel goes back to what he was 2 years ago, it's a very different-looking pitching staff. On the other hand, if he struggles, as great as that Astros lineup could be, I think the pitching is going to be concerned. Finish us off, Justin, National League Central.
I'd like to go on the record just to respond to that and say that I'm very pessimistic on Keuchel bouncing back to the levels of 2015. But I agree, it's a great X factor. NL Central, to me, sticking with the pitching theme, it's how the rotations of the Cardinals and Pirates shake out. Obviously, everybody's trying to catch the Cubs, and we've talked about how maybe they might have rotation depth issues. But to me, I see problems all over these two teams who have been excellent for the better part of the last half-decade for the Pirates and decade for the Cardinals. Wainwright was ineffective last season. Lance Lynn's returning from surgery. Alex Reyes is already done for the season. Carlos Martinez, without question, their most effective starter, has never thrown 200 innings in a season. For the Pirates, Garrett Cole was both ineffective and injured last season. We have to see if Ivan Nova if his Pirates era is for real and he's a legitimate mid-rotation starter now. Tyler Glasnow's walk issues and rebuilt mechanics this spring and offseason. And Jamison Taillon had pitched 165 innings between MLB and the minors last year. Obviously, if the Pirates go deep into the season, they'll need him to throw substantially more than that. I like both of these teams, particularly the Pirates, to bounce back and to be competitive in the NL Central, but I think there are huge, huge questions across both rotations.
I love that. The first reference ever to the Ivan Nova era. Justin, Karl, thanks for doing this.
See you guys soon.
We'll be back in a moment with Seattle Mariners General Manager Jerry Dipoto. Jerry Dipoto is the general manager of the Seattle Mariners. And Jerry, as you know, last week there's a lot of conversation about Theo Epstein in the cage hitting against Ryan Debster, showing off a swing. And so what I've been doing on the podcast recently is when I've had general managers on, some of your peers, I've asked them, okay, it raises the question, who would be the best hitter, the best pitcher of any of the current executives? We talked to Ross Atkins, the Blue Jays, and here's what he said. Give a listen.
Yeah, I'd say Jerry probably wins both of those unless I'm forgetting somebody. Yeah, I mean,
Jerry Dipoto, general manager of the Mariners.
yeah. I mean, I tell you what, I don't belong in that ranking.
So we had to create a separate category on the podcast because of you, Jerry. It was decided by Billy Epler and others that you can't count Jerry Dipoto because you have more big league experience than a lot of your peers. So it does raise the question for you, who would you guess would be the best guys?
Wow, I would say if you're creating an extra category, they probably haven't looked at my history as a major league hitter, which is leaves a little to be desired. But If I had to guess, let me go with. I can't pick Billy Beane. Is that off limits?
You could pick him if you want. He has not been raised by other people.
Yeah, Billy was no Babe Ruth, but I'll take Billy as a hitter. I'm going to take Billy Epler as a pitcher. Billy keeps himself in great shape. Pitched in college. I mean, he's been down the road. Ross has the touch and feel skills to go out there and dazzle. So and I will say this: we were looking on as a front office in total, gathered around the TV. Sitting there with bated breath, watching to see what would happen when Theo took his first pass at Ryan Dempster, and we were all quite impressed. It was we gave it a rounding standing ovation.
It did spur an idea that sometime during the general manager's meetings, you guys need to have like a wiffle ball game or a softball game or even a baseball game. I think that would be a lot of fun and maybe fun for you guys as well. What do you think?
I think it would be a blast. A handful of years back, this might be 8 or 10 years ago, and at that time many of us were assistants or personnel guys, but we had basketball games, and I think the ringer on the basketball court was no question A.J. Preller. And I don't know how his skills translate to baseball, but I know if I was picking a basketball team, he's the John Stockton of Major League GMs.
All right, let's get to the Mariners. We had a conversation earlier this week. Ryan Divish was telling us about Felix Hernandez coming into camp, greatly strengthened. Can you tell us about the conversation that you had with him going into the offseason?
Felix, I talked to him in September when he first approached me about the idea of his pitching for Venezuela and the WBC. And I think he was a little surprised when my first reaction was that I thought it would be great. And it was for these reasons. I know we had talked to Felix about the off-season workload. He had many of the things that he did through his off-season were conscious decisions on his part. He talked to Robinson Cano and to Nelson Cruz about working with their personal strength and coordinator, physical strength and conditioning coordinator, Iron Glenn, and he started working with him on his own. He developed a program with Iron Glenn that they coordinated with our medical and training people, and it worked out great. We talked to Felix about kind of building a moderate pitch count and an innings load through winter ball to try to prepare him for the WBC, so we weren't just starting from scratch, and really productive conversations into the off season about the preparation more than anything else. And then once he got into Major League camp, reporting here to Peoria, and we saw what kind of shape he was in, I think we were all taken aback and maybe even more than the physical condition he's in. I think he weighed in 17 pounds heavier than he was a year ago, and in this case it was 17 pounds of good weight. His body fat was down. He looks really fresh in the face. His legs are strong, and the early returns when he was out on the mound, he's up to 93 miles an hour, pretty routinely pitching at 91, 92, and every inning that he threw before he left Peoria to join the Venezuelan team got better and better, right up until it crested with striking out the side, sitting at 92, 93 with the changeup we know Felix has. And he's starting to introduce some new pitches and maybe coordinate his pitches in new ways that are pretty intriguing.
What did you say to him when you saw what kind of condition he was in?
Dave, everybody across the board. He looks engaged. I told him how happy I was to see him. He looks great. My first comment to him was, I feel like we just signed a 16-year-old out of Venezuela. He looks so much younger than he looked last year, and because he's fit and you see that there's a spark in his eye. Felix wants to be here. He wants to contribute, and we do a pretty aggressive series of meetings in the mornings, and Felix has been right at the epicenter of what's going on in the room and stirring it up. He's really engaged with the team, his teammates, and he looks like he's having fun. And I'm not sure that there was really ever a point last year where I thought, when I looked at Felix, and the first thing I thought was he's having fun. But this year, every day I've looked at him in spring training, I think to myself, Felix is having fun. And that's step one.
When last I talked to you, we had a conversation about your improved outfield defense for this year, and you mentioned how your thoughts were shaped by what you saw from Mariners teams back in the early 2000s. Can you just explain what your thinking was and what you saw in those teams and how you think it'll impact this year?
We talked for days, hours about how to build the perfect scenario for a team in Safeco Field, understanding the dynamics of the ballpark, the dynamics of the division that we play in, where 3 of the 5 teams play in larger ballparks with Safeco, the Big A in Anaheim, and out in Oakland. How could we maximize our returns in building our team, our roster build, without really affecting the core players that we have in Cruz and Cano and Seager? And it's what we came up with is the Pat Gillick years with the Mariners. It's just fantastic performance, and granted they were built on phenomenal players, and it always starts with the players. But we look back at that outfield defense when you had Ichiro in right, you had Mike Cameron in center, and frankly, it didn't matter who was playing left in a moment in time. But in the early going, Randy Wynn out there, it was an unbelievably athletic outfield. They could cover a ton of ground. And there is a lot of ground out there to cover. I guess the dimensions of Safeco Field aren't grossly different than many others, but as you know from having seen many games there, the ball tends to hang up in the gaps a little bit. And if you have the ability to cover those gaps and range out into left and right center field, you've got an advantage. And it's something we tried to do at the start of last off season. So going into the 2016 season. And we couldn't really tap into the players that made it work for us. And this year, with the additions of guys like Mitch Haniger and Gerard Dyson, the return or development of Guillermo Heredia, who's terrific in the outfield, and a second year of Leonis Martin, who was a real advantage for us in center last year. That combination of players, in addition to guys that are competing for extra spots like Ben Gamble and Boog Powell, who are really defensively gifted as well. So it's a speed defense-oriented outfield. We think we're going to hit enough, but our thought was, looking back on those early 2000s Mariners teams with guys like Ichiro and Cameron and Randy Wynn and what they were able to do defensively, it was that was what we wanted to replicate.
We got about 2 minutes left with you. I got 2 quick ones for you. To me, when you look at your team, James Paxton is a linchpin guy. He's a guy who could represent a tipping point. He had a great outing last time out, faced 10 batters, struck out 5. What do you see in him this spring?
I see confidence, and if that was Paxton, James has always had incredible stuff. He's got great angle. It's a high-velocity lefty with what has really developed into a 4-pitch arsenal. His curveball and cutter have become real weapons over this last year. But more than anything else, watching him move around this spring, James believes in himself. I think he knows this is his time to step forward, and we saw it last year. It doesn't really show up on a stat sheet because half of his season or close to half of his season was spent in AAA, just as a reset. But when he came back to the big leagues, it really changed the look of our team. And right now, between James and what I think is a really strong spring to this point from Drew Smiley, and we just talked about a resurgent Felix Hernandez, we're pretty excited about where our starting pitching staff is and in general with the team.
One of your big moves of the offseason, trading for shortstop Gene Segura. What convinced you that his big bounce-back year last year with Arizona will carry over into 2017, 2018?
Well, with Gene, I'm familiar with the person. I've actually traded him once before. So it traded him from the Angels to the Brewers in the Zach Greinke deal back in 2012. So I had some history with the person and trusted the human being. And we looked at all the factors and tried to manage the information. Gene was an all-star in 2013. He's a physically gifted player. He can run, he can throw, he can hit. He does have a little bit of power in his game and always did. And we saw it manifest last year in Arizona in a really consistent way. And if you looked at his season, it was 6 months of across-the-board performance. There was never a lull, and which is kind of remarkable. Most big league hitters will get into hot and cold streaks, and Gene is prone to streakiness over the course of his baseball life. But last year, for 6 months, it was just steady across-the-board, strong production. The exit velocities were convincing. His exit velocities jumped considerably. The way the ball was coming off his bat was just different than it was before. And he changed his hands, he recreated his swing, and as a result, the trajectory or the angle of the ball coming off the bat really changed. So the combination of his physical skills, the trust in the person, understanding you were acquiring a player who was 26 years old, and we were tapping into what should be the prime years of his career. Now, I don't know that any player should be expected to replicate the across the board. He did some really phenomenal things last year, and I don't know that we could expect him to deliver the 20 homer, 40 double, 100 run, 300 batting average, 200 hit season year over year. But the fact that he did it speaks to his talent level, and we believe we're closer to having him do that again than reverting back to where he was during 14 and 15 when he dealt with a lot of issues that would have really put most people behind the eight ball.
Hey, Jerry, thanks for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure, Buster. Easy to do.
Doug Glanville played 9 years in the big leagues. He is an analyst for ESPN. And, Doug, I wanted to ask you first about this. In the last week, we've seen situations in which a couple of them were high-profile young players had their contracts renewed by their respective teams. Two examples, Noah Syndergaard was renewed by the Mets about $8,000 less than what he was looking for. Mookie Betts was renewed at $950,000. Mookie, of course, was the second in the American League in MVP voting last year. And then on the other hand, Chris Bryant of the Cubs got a record-setting contract agreement with the Cubs. In other words, this was not a case where the Cubs renewed his contract unilaterally. They gave him over $1 million. They set a record. I never understood the approach that teams have had in cases of players who accomplished a lot of things when they were young, and the teams, controlled the contract situation. But when you look at someone like Noah Syndergaard, okay, and they wind up renewing him at the savings of $8,000. I know what Sandy Alderson said about they have a system and how they do these things. Just forget the system. Just if you want to tell players who follow Noah Syndergaard that they didn't get the same treatment as Syndergaard, then you say to them, hey, if you go out and pitch like Noah Syndergaard did in 2016, we'll pay you. Don't worry about it. The same thing with Mookie Betts. If you finish second in the American League in MVP, we'll take care of you. And that seems to be what the Cubs did with Chris Bryant. They could have given him $550,000, but the way they handled it was an acknowledgement of, hey, you won the National League MVP award. You were great. You went over your value, and we want to reward you. If any other player has a problem with that, go out and win the MVP, and we'll talk. What do you think?
Yeah, Buster, it's almost like a new negotiation step. It's a negotiating step in the process. We know about arbitration. The sort of the big paydays come, and when you have young players that are not quite there yet, where they have this leverage to kind of put in their price, sort of their price tag. You're kind of under quote unquote government control. You're under control
right.
of the organizations. And I was renewed. I was renewed probably long before this period. It seems like it's somewhat amicable, and not that mine wasn't, but I was with the Phillies. I had been traded over from the Cubs, and I remember I was driving on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and this is after the season was over, and I heard on the radio something in the order of the general manager saying, well, I think Glanville, who had a really good season, hit 300 this year, is probably going to get, substantial raise. And I remember the number 400,000 being floated out. And back then, I don't know, the minimum was like 109 or whatever it was. So I ended up getting renewed. And renewal is sort of then was more of a statement of we couldn't come to terms. And it could be seen as almost like a black mark against the team, because you didn't believe you got your value. So if you ever go to arbitration, then they look back and say, well, hey, why does this guy renewed? He was worth this, and you paid him this. It starts to weigh in your advantage in an arbitration case. So the Phillies at the time were very concerned about it. Ed Wade was the GM, and he came and wanted to meet me and make sure I was okay. And I said, look, no problem. I just, my agent, of course, and I heard that my value was a little bit more. And I know you're trying to be fair. I'm not, I had no beef with it, but my agent instructed me really not to sign at that value. So they just renewed me. And I think that, they gave me some bump up, but it wasn't what we had heard on the quote-unquote streets. So that's the concern. So I think the teams now are saying, well, we can't just give Bryant $550 because he gets to arbitration or he gets to that point. This is going to be a problem. So let's try to work together. And then I'm sure at some point, because these guys are so incredibly talented and successful, they'll get their big payday. They're just not ready to do it right now.
I also, from a team's perspective, strategically, a relationship with Mookie Betts is one that I want to have to be seamless, right? Because at some point, if you're the Red Sox, you're going to want to sign him to a long-term deal. Certainly that's the case with Chris Bryant and the Cubs. Syndergaard, $8,000, given the money. If that's what makes him happy, it's a drop in the bucket considering how much money is being made by teams these days.
Yeah, Buster, I mean, that's the danger. And this is, once again, an early negotiating step that's starting to develop, especially with these superstar young players, and there's many of them, Lindor and so on. You want to have harmony. You want to make sure the guy's not going to hold some grudge, go to arbitration, and then all of a sudden be upset and maybe say, well, I'm going to test the free agent market. So that is the danger. And that's why you're seeing, Mike Trout, or, you see these huge level of contract bumps before they really have to pay. And, there was a new era, recently we had this era of, lock up these young players, multi-million deals, and you get a discount later on. You pay them and lock them in, give them the security, but you got a discount later, so you pay up front. Well, now they're kind of going a little more year to year, and I'm sure mid-season Bryant's hitting $350. He's probably going to get signed to a long-term deal.
Tim Tebow got his first exhibition game appearance in spring training for the Mets on Wednesday. It went very badly. You are someone who played against Michael Jordan, who Tebow is compared to a lot. What do you make of this situation? What do you make of Tebow?
It's what's interesting when I look back to the Jordan year, and I played against him the whole year and the fall league. You heard a lot of different schools of thought. Now, from internally, minor league players that were kind of scrapping their way, they've played Double-A for 4 years, and those guys, it was hard because they never got a chance to be in big league camp, and they had put in years of time, and there's a lot of Tim Tebow talent in the minor leagues. He's an exceptional athlete for different reasons, whether it's the Heisman and all the hype and so on, playing football, but at the same time, there is that school of thought, too, that, hey, there's a lot of guys that have, long paid their dues and never had a inkling, set a foot in a major league spring training camp. So I'm not mad at Tim Tebow and the Mets, and, hey, go for it. The guy's, got some talent, and he's got the work ethic, which Michael Jordan had, by the way. He took batting practice before games. After the games, he stayed on and did more work, and he actually had a pretty good season for a guy who never played baseball since high school. He had over 200 in Double-A, and Double-A these days is it's a tall order.
I remember last year in spring training when Yoenis Cespedes came in with all those cars early in camp, and at one point, it was a story basically every day for the first couple weeks of camp, and Terry Collins, after some of that, after a while, he said, enough is enough. I get the feeling, and I don't know this, but they're probably Mets officials, coaches, maybe Terry Collins, who privately, looking at the Tebow situation, especially the other day after watching him bat against Porcello when he was completely overmatched, at some point they're going to be like, hey, enough is enough with this. Let's move on. What do you think?
Yeah, they may, but, is he going to go to Double-A? Is he going to, if he really wants to give this a shot and he has a chance to have a job in the minors, you take it. And I never hold it. Like I said, Michael Jordan did considerably better than we could ever imagine. It was like he willed himself to hit 200. He stole 30 some odd bases or so. It wasn't horrible. So the Mets are going to see it through, and yes, he could just get released. And but at the same time, he's in big league camp, so he's just getting the best instruction. But at the same, maybe he'll be able to take that down to the minor leagues and see what happens. But I mean, I highly doubt he'll break camp or something with the Mets, but he might have a chance to break camp in one of their minor league affiliates, and we'll see how much he wants it. But he'll probably hold his own to some degree. But it's whether you can do that over 144 or 162 games. That's what brings you to your knees.
Yeah, when I say that Collins and the staff might be thinking enough is enough, I mean more of put him down to the minor league camp. I suspect the perfect place for him to play this year is in the Florida State League. And Florida is his home turf. They're probably owners of other Florida State League teams who are rooting like crazy for the Mets to keep him because he would be a draw down in that league and give him the at-bats. And I do think that him being around a group of young players would be good because a lot like Jordan, you hear stories about how other players benefited from being around him and seeing his drive and seeing his level of preparation.
Everywhere Jordan went, sold out by far, no doubt.
Exactly. So I don't think it's a bad thing. I just, if you're the Mets and you're in the middle of spring training, the staffers probably are like, okay, we can give those 4 at-bats to somebody else. You wrote a piece recently about the rule change with intentional walk, which, opens up a big picture conversation for you.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of it more through the lens of, being on the field. And it was always a moment where, okay, Bryce Harper's coming up. These great players are coming up. And sure, I get it. I'm playing against them. I don't want them to beat us. So you are in a situation where you just put them on base. So strategically, I get it. I think it was always just the 4 pitches always seemed so forced and so fake. And you knew a lot of pitchers that had trouble. I mean, look, I had trouble trying to throw slower than my normal speed, right? And so they lob these balls in, the catcher's in gear looking ridiculous, trying to jump, looking through a mask. And, I just didn't, at a certain point, see the point, and that's kind of what I wrote about. And I'm like, okay, I understand the strategy, but, and yeah, fine. Once in a blue moon, the guy throws it over his head or the guy leaves it out over the plate, but is that really what we want to see? I mean, that's not really the point. I mean, it's like the instant replay. Okay, I get it. But then when the guy slides into second and comes a hair off the base and we do it in super, super, super slow-mo and you say, oh, he came off while the tag, is that really the out you want to record? Yes, it's true. He is out. But it's just sort of, you're going so granular that I think you start to lose something because you're just looking for these type of edges instead of just, focusing on the big picture. And I thought, look, the guy's he's going to first. Fine. Just, I agreed with the change. Like, hey, go ahead. Just take your base, whatever. Move on.
Hey, Doug, thanks for doing this. Great to talk with you.
All right, Buster. Appreciate it, guys. Anytime.
Bleacher Tweets.
Buster, it's my favorite part of the week, Bleacher Tweets on a Friday. And the first one comes from Don Irvine, at Don Irvine. And Don says the last person to steal 70 bases in a season was Jacoby Ellsbury in 2009. Will we ever see another 70-plus stolen base season?
Yes, and it'll happen this year, and Billy Hamilton will get it done. We saw his improvement at the plate last year. His on-base percentage will soar. Nobody will be able to stop him.
And he got the vote of confidence from Byron Buxton, who says that Hamilton is faster than he is. So, he could do it. Next one from Aaron Hoke, at AM Hoke. And he says, does Jason Hayward's elite glove give value to the Cubs even though his bat remains below average?
Yes, and last year the Cubs, even though he struggled offensively, Cubs folks were really happy with his defense. They were really happy with his base running. Those were really the backbone of his value when they signed him. And look, I think that if he winds up losing his everyday job, which is a distinct possibility if he doesn't start to hit, he'll still be a guy who will finish a lot of games. He'll be like, they have those the running backs who are the fourth quarter guys. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about? That's going to be Jason Hayward this year. He's going to be the guy chewing the clock late in the game.
There you go. If only there was a clock. Check this out, Buster. We got a very famous Bleacher tweeter coming at us, Kennesaw Landis. What do you think of that? He's at Judge Ken Landis, the mountain. And he says, Alan Craig has looked good this spring. Any chance he becomes a relevant ball player again?
I got a feeling that if he called Kennesaw Mountain Landis Ken Landis, that he'd probably be banned for life. Okay, I think that probably would be the case. Look, Alan Craig's in this weird situation where he's getting paid a lot of money by the Red Sox. He's not a part of their 40-man roster, so he doesn't count against their luxury tax. I think the only way he becomes relevant again is if he goes absolutely nuts in AAA to the point that some team is willing to take him off the Red Sox hands and absorb that salary. But he would have to go absolutely nuts to make that happen. Otherwise, he's sort of stuck in baseball purgatory along with your man, Rusney Castillo.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we go from Alan Craig to Bleacher Tweeter Craig. He's at Addies_Daddy. And he says, I remember the Pirates and Marlins from recent years, but who could be the best outfield this year as a team?
Red Sox, without a doubt. You got Mookie Betts, who finished second in the American League MVP race last year. You have Jackie Bradley Jr., arguably the game's best center fielder in that spot. And then Andrew Benintendi, who is Keith Law's number one prospect. Everyone thinks he's going to be a monster offensively. That's going to be a great outfield. Plus, you got Chris Young, who hammers lefties waiting on in the number 4 spot.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what Benintendi can do this year. Next one from Spence at Texas Baseball Fan. Buster, please explain to me why the league has to negotiate with the union to raise the strike zone when the rule is already on the books.
Josh, double-check that for me. You're not a lawyer, right?
I am not a lawyer, no. I'm also
and
not
I'm not
doctor.
a lawyer either. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, we're not lawyers, so I can't give you the absolute technical reason why, but here's the general issue. Under the terms of labor law, any change in work conditions has to be negotiated with the union. So that's my broad stroke.
All right. Maybe we could get more insight from Judge Ken Landis. A couple more, Buster. This one from Quincy Wheeler at Dreaming Baseball. He says, as the NFL begins its free agency period, who's your pick for the most significant free agent signing of this past offseason?
Mr. Unbuttoned Shirt himself, Yoenis Cespedes.
There you go.
Who re-signed 4 years, $110 million with the Mets. He is a monster right now.
He absolutely is. And, Buster, we saved the best Bleacher tweet for last. It's from Brad Kramer at Kramer22. And he says, Buster, yesterday was a great show for Josh. You're darn right it was. First was his take on Tebow, and second was declaring Jennifer Lopez a Hall of Famer, which she absolutely is. It seems like only the media has any interest on Tebow, Buster.
Did you make up a fake Twitter account, Josh?
I'm not here.
Are you really Brad Kramer? Could that possibly be you?
I'm not here to talk about the past, Buster. Keep those Bleacher tweets coming. Use the hashtag Bleacher Tweets.
One last thing.
We heard from a couple of tweets that they liked one last thing, and so we're going to do that moving forward. On this date in baseball history in 1951, Josh, I had forgotten about this. J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime director of the FBI, declined the job offer to be baseball commissioner. Think about that. If J. Edgar Hoover had become baseball commissioner in 1951, think about the wiretapping we could have had on the drinking exploits of Mickey Mantle or, Charlie Finley, Jim Bouton when he was putting together the book Ball 4. We would have gotten all that wiretapping stuff if J. Edgar Hoover had been in charge. What do you think?
I think that would have been awesome, Buster. Yeah, it's too bad it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Man, if only.
J. Edgar Hoover is baseball commissioner. Imagine how life in the United States would have been different. I mean, all the history that would have changed if J. Edgar Hoover had gone into baseball.
It's the ultimate butterfly effect, Buster. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it for today. My thanks to Jerry Dipoto, to Doug Glanville, to the Fireball Express of Karl Ravech and Justin Havens, and to Josh Macri, who produced this podcast every single day. Have a great weekend, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Baseball Tonight podcast. If you're playing fantasy baseball, don't forget to listen to the Fantasy Focus podcast. Check out all podcasts at ESPN.com/PodCenter. Baseball Tonight, the podcast.